Welcome, everyone, to the eighth ever episode of the Open Thumb Podcast. I'm your host, Cole Houck, and today we're finally talking about college basketball. I got a good friend on his first time being on the show, but he'll be on here a lot more for college basketball. Landon, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. And, I'm excited to talk about the slate this past Saturday. It was a real exciting one. So looking to dive into that.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite college basketball slates in a long time. I mean, they're just the two top four matchups was really unexpected, especially the one being out of conference. So first off, before we get into a little bit, tell a little about yourself, how you got started watching college basketball, stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been an NC State fan for my whole life. Actually, my great aunt was working, she worked for Jim Valvano. My dad still tells me all these cool stories about, that working for Jim Valvano and what he stood for and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, I grew up playing basketball. Whenever I have free time, I love to sit down on the couch and watch college basketball. I love ACC basketball. I could probably talk about that for hours and hours. Yeah, just looking looking forward to it.
Definitely, definitely, yeah. And we're gonna have plans to talk about each conference, get into the SEC and ACC. You said you're a pretty big hoop head when it comes to those conferences, so looking forward to doing those in the next coming weeks. I think the tournaments start in about 2 weeks. I think it's about a week and a half
Yeah.
left of the year, right?
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
sounds
coming up,
right.
yeah, coming up real soon. Really excited for that. So the first game I want to talk about is just get the big games out of the way. The first game was the Duke Michigan game. What was your just a reaction to that? First off, being an out of conference game, it's so late in the season. What did you think about that?
Yeah, that's kind of honestly, like you said, the first time that I had seen such a big matchup, like this late in the season out of conference. Usually you don't see that type of thing. But really, I thought the Duke Michigan game especially was a really exciting game to watch. Duke's a legit team. I think they have a lot to offer. I mean, Boozer got into foul trouble and they still were able to pull the win out. So yeah, Duke's definitely legit this year. I feel like they have a chance to go pretty far in the tournament. Just depends on health issues and that sort of thing.
Yeah, this team is deeper than usually like the freshman heavy teams are. They had a couple guys been around for a little while. I really do like this Duke team a decent bit. I like what's his name off the bench, Malik Brown. Defensively,
Yeah.
they're big. He's been good for a couple of years now. I like him a lot on defense. They looked really good out there, man. Cam Boozer scares me as an NC State fan. I don't know what we're supposed to do against him, in like a week or two when we play. He's a much better passer than I expected to. He finished with 7 assists today, but it was different passes too. It was making passes out to the corners or find somebody dunker spot right next to the basket. He's a better facilitator than I thought he was going to be. So that was interesting to find. Michigan is also a really solid team, and there's a reason that they were so high. I think they were three going into this game. Yeah, they got a lot of good pieces over there. Yeah, Elliot Cadeau went 1 for 8 from the field, and they still had a really close game. They got a bunch of bigs over there. They play a good team basketball. Dusty May has got a really good program going for the last couple of years. Lindenberg is really interesting. He took a lot of shots the other day, and I was surprised to see him to have such a high offensive usage. But I like him a lot. He's a good guy. He's got a really good build. The only issue for as far as like NBA goes is that he's not a great 3-point shooter. That came off, the other day playing Duke and might have been part of the reason why they lost because he missed so many shots in the second half. But they still got a bunch of good depth over there. And the Mara guy is really good. I'm excited to see him at the NBA. He's an interesting big because he's a very much so non-shooter. Actually can't hit free throws either. He's shooting 50% from the free throw line this year. But he's very good defensively, really fun passer to watch. I like players like that where it's low usage, it can make smart plays, and he's just kind of a demon on defensively. Think of like a Donovan Clingan from UConn and now Portland Trailblazers, but a better passer.
Yeah, I honestly wasn't like I hadn't really watched or seen Mara play, but after seeing that game, he was a really big factor for them. I also thought that, like we mentioned earlier, Duke's pieces off the bench really stepped up big and sort of propelled them to victory. I think that Kamenia dude, he provided really big minutes whenever Boozer got into foul trouble. Like if you look at the box score, he didn't score that much or anything, but he was really good defensively. Same like Malik Brown.
Yeah. I said it's a depth thing. They got more depth than a lot of the Shireman teams have had. It's just because they've had some of those guards stay around for a little while. They brought in some, forward depth that hasn't been there the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think I saw something the other day. I would have to argue Shire's probably one of the best coaches in college basketball. He's a great recruiter. And people kind of looked at him. like not that great of a coach, but he's definitely proven. I mean, they've only lost twice, so he's definitely proven to be one of the best coaches in my opinion. So
I think he's definitely one of the best recruiters. I still gotta wait to see more success. Obviously, they've had pretty good success in the postseason in the NCAA tournament, but nothing that outweighed what the talent was in the court, in my opinion. Does that make sense? Where it's like they've had a top whatever you want to say roster, and they've got that far into the tournament, they haven't made the final move that they should. They haven't gone all the way yet. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean that's fair. I just feel like honestly, this team is centered around Cameron Boozer. I feel like if you give that team to another coach, that they would just put Cameron Boozer on an ISO and just let him run like that. But they definitely have packages for Isaiah Evans and packages for their big men, alley things like that. So
Foster played pretty good the other day too. He had a couple shots on Michigan off the bench as well. He's turned out pretty well for that team too, don't you think?
yeah, he's turned out real well. I feel like he's definitely on the streakier side. Like one game he'll have 20 points or whatever it might be, and then the next game he won't do much but pass the ball. But I guess that's how it goes. He's a good veteran for that team though.
He definitely is. Isaiah Evans is one of the streaky guys for me too. Obviously, he actually almost shot him out of the game the other day. He shot a really poor percentage, especially in the second half. But I feel like he's a pretty solid guy, and if he's hitting, he's gonna win you some games, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if he hits shots, I think they have a chance to at least make the Elite Eight, Final Four, to say the least. So
Yeah, kind of at the bare minimum if he's hitting shots. I mean, you're relying on other guys to not do well, pretty much to at least make the Final Four, in my opinion. They got a really good roster. So the next game we have here was the Arizona Houston game. That followed it right after as well. This game was a ton of fun to watch. Two of also the best programs in the nation. And it was not how I thought it would go at all. I mean, we got to talk about Anthony Del Orso first. I barely knew this guy. He actually spent 2 years at Campbell, funny enough, right around here. He had 22 points off the bench, hit a couple of threes. This Arizona team is not known for hitting threes, so it's kind of a refreshing thing to see that. Yeah, just so much fun. But what is your instant reaction to this game?
yeah, I mean, similar to you, I had honestly never heard of Anthony Del Orso. He was really fun to watch. The little bit of the game that I watched, he was very exciting. Gave him a spark off the bench. And overall, I think that Houston they sort of lacked production from their bench. They didn't really have much of anything come off the bench, so they were just kind of relying on Fleming and Sharp and that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean Fleming and Sharp didn't play well altogether. I think they shot like 8 for 30 or something like that. So yeah, it was a tough game for Houston overall. I'm still sort of trying to learn what they're about because I feel like one game you watch them and they're really good, and then a few games later you watch them and you know they're not so good. But I guess that's how college basketball works.
Yeah, there's a lot of ups and downs for teams. I think Arizona's problem is they've been injured. A lot of you guys coming in and out. They actually had no Noah Pete yesterday or on Saturday. So that was a hit for them as far as offensive production goes. He's been pretty good for them. They got a lot of solid pieces that can do well. It's just again, it's a really weird team seeing that they genuinely do not take threes and they keep winning games. It's very against what we see in the modern day college basketball scene. They got a bunch of guys that are probably going to the NBA, the highest of which is supposed to be Braden Burries. I haven't seen a ton of him, and I was not really impressed, frankly, at all in that Houston game. Now, granted, Houston has a bunch of good defensive guards. It's hard to go off, against Houston when your game plan is to guard you pretty deeply. But he didn't do anything besides getting to the free throw line, and he got 8 free throws, so he did that. But I got to see more of him to see what he's known for. I like Toby Awaka a lot. I've only seen him play a couple times before, but he was really good the other day. His defense is a lot of fun to watch. The only issue is that he'll get in foul trouble, and that could be an issue down the road. Later in deep March Madness run. I feel like they're gonna need some big depth if him and the other big guy, the European kid, if they don't, they're getting in foul trouble. You got problems down there. Koa Pete's been in and out of the lineup, so it's just they got issue. I like their center rotation, the big rotation, but I think there's issues, especially if fouls get into play. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I just feel like they they'll definitely be hurting if they get into foul trouble. But overall, I just felt like both teams kind of didn't shoot the ball well, which I guess is Houston's not really known to shoot the ball that great. They're known to sit down and guard you, kind of like the old school Virginia. It was definitely a fun game to watch. It was just in terms of rating those games, Arizona, Houston, and then Duke, Michigan. I would probably say that Duke, Michigan was a better watch, but that's just me.
I mean, I understand that. I think it was too. I think the other one was more of a defensive battle, the Houston, Arizona game. And going into it, you could have predicted that. Houston's, like you said, been a defensive team for as long as Kelvin Sampson's been there. And Arizona's played pretty well at defense too. So I think it's a different game than what I was expecting. It was slower than I thought it was going to be. Houston plays slow and Arizona can play slow sometimes, but yeah, it was not quite what I expected. I will say Houston is really interesting. They've dropped, I think, three in a row now, right? We'll get to the other game a little bit later, but is it three losses now?
Yep, three
Yes.
losses. I was just going to mention that. They need to find something offensively to bounce back from a three-game skid. I'm not sure who they play next. It might be Colorado or
Yeah. I was gonna get to
yeah,
that later. They're gonna kick the snot out of Colorado. That's that's gonna be a tough game for the Buffaloes. I
yeah,
will say Houston's starting five is really interesting. I know all their guys. I know what they're good and bad at for the most part. I've seen a decent bit of Houston's games this year. I don't know anything about their bench. I like the starting five a lot, but I think their bench doesn't score enough. There's issues, and I think it's gonna peek its head around the corner when it comes down to an Elite Eight game or a Final Four game where they're not hitting shots. Chris Nack is good. He's a really good defender and a great offensive rebounder, maybe one of the best rebounders in the draft. Going up this year. He's a good prospect, and he actually shot 5 threes. I think he missed all of them today. But the fact that the 6'10" and 6'11" guy who can rebound like crazy isn't afraid to shoot is a pretty good sign. What I wanted to mention though, more than anything else, is Flemings and Sharp combining for 8 for 28 from the fields. I I I didn't think they'd do that, and I didn't think they'd ever do it again, to be honest. We'll get to it later again, but they repeated it against Kansas 2 days later, and they lost that game too. So I mean, do you believe in the depth of this team at all, or do you think if their main guys aren't hitting like this, they're gonna lose come March, come April?
yeah. I definitely believe that if they're not hitting, that they're gonna fall. I would say Sweet 16 if they don't start hitting, that they'll probably get knocked out. They played a pretty tough schedule, and that's what's keeping a lot of these teams in like the SEC and other conferences. They're playing really tough teams and kind of beating up on each other, if you will. Ultimately, if you're not hitting in the tournament, then a team, a little team that is not that good can knock you off, and that's kind of I think that's Houston's only, well, not only, but one of their liabilities that they have is that they don't have much bench production, and if if Flemings and Sharp aren't hitting, they're kind of taken out.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Like I said, I think they have a little too many issues, more than I'm used to with the Kelvin Sampson team. Like obviously they always play slow and they're not the most efficient team typically. They've had good guys come in and out. Somebody like a Jamal Shed comes to mind where he was never efficient, but he was a winning player, right? He still is in the NBA for my Raptors. So they've had that for a while, but this year's team is just it's the depth that I'm worried about. Their bench guys have started playing from last year's teams have started playing a little bit more. So their bench guys they have now don't have a ton of experience, and I think it's showing it in moments where they're giving up leads.
Yeah, and I would love to see them, like, obviously a lot of their games have been close, but I would love to see them play their bench guys more just to give them more experience. Probably Colorado's a good
Was
game to
just gonna say that.
start that with.
Mm,
But if they can kind of like, honestly, UNC comes to mind with Zayden High. He's stepped into a pretty big role for that team. So maybe if Houston can find a spark off the bench, or you know somebody that might not get a ton of minutes right now, that can boost them in the tournament and maybe give them a chance.
yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. The next game that we have was the UConn Villanova game, and I didn't catch as much of this as I wanted to live, so I went back and watched it. It was a pretty straightforward game though. I mean, it was pretty close for most of it. UConn was ahead for a lot of the game. the main thing was that it was a really balanced attack for UConn. I mean, looking at the box score, they had 6 guys that scored between 8 points and 12 points. Nobody scored more than 12, and they still won the game by, I think it was like 9 points, something like that. It was almost double digit win for them. So UConn still looks really good. I think they have a couple issues, but their defense is really solid, and I think that's going to carry them pretty far come March. Their bench is pretty good as well. I mean, they had 22 points today off the bench compared to Villanova's 8, so I believe in their depth, unlike somebody like a Houston does. And then as far as talking about prospects goes, I don't know much about Braylon Mullins. And today, I mean, again, the game against Villanova, he looked pretty good. He didn't need the ball a ton. He had pretty low usage. He was efficient on the shots that he did take. A well-rounded guy, but I don't know that his ceiling is all that high from what I've seen. What do you think about, the game and then UConn as a whole?
Yeah, kind of like you mentioned, it was a real balanced scoring game. I feel like Dan Hurley kind of trains his team to be sort of like a well scoring, balanced scoring type of team, not like, one person dropping 30 and the next score has 10 or whatever. But ultimately, Villanova, they didn't really have any help off the bench. And then also something that I saw was UConn dominated and killed Villanova on the boards. I think they were plus 13. Whenever you're winning the rebounding margin like that, you're ultimately going to win the game. It's pretty hard in college basketball to win the game if you're down 13, 15 boards, whatever it might be. But yeah, it was a pretty tight game. UConn sort of pulled away in the second half, which, gave them a decent lead. It wasn't really a flashy game. It was just, Dan Hurley and fundamental basketball. In terms of UConn overall, I would say I really like the one kid, Solo Ball, I think is his name. I think he's a real good shooter, and they're definitely really balanced, and I think they have a little bit of depth that can take them a decently long way in the tournament. So that'll be fun to watch. I'm just waiting for them to play a few decent. I know they played Arizona early on, but some more decent opponents like that.
Yeah, that's kind of my concern about him too, is that on paper they have everything, and obviously Dan Hurley's been a fantastic coach for a long time, one of the best, if not the best, active, college basketball coach in recent history. So they have all the tools to get there. My only concern is, like you said, where it comes into the Big East being down this year compared to relatively down compared to what they're used to. It's mostly just the bottom talent of Big East. Big East is not a very big conference. They're only going to have 5 teams that are going to make the tournament. If even that, it may be even less than that, which is less than what they're used to. The bottom half of the conference is just much weaker than it usually is. A lot of the middle ground teams are having a little bit of a down year. The bad teams are playing a little bit better, but like your Georgetowns are still down pretty bad. But Paul Marquette is playing so much worse than what they usually do this year. I still don't really know what's going on down there in Marquette or up there in Marquette. It's just that's my main thing too, is seeing them. I'm really curious what they do in the tournament going against better teams, but I always have put my faith in Dan Hurley. I can't go against that guy. He's proved me wrong too many times in recent history.
I honestly could see them being one of the teams that could win it all. They have the coaching. I believe that they have some kids off the bench that can put up some numbers. So we'll see where they go in the tournament. But
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. Like I said, they're just always UConn. You can't count them out no matter what they do, as long as they got Hurley at the helm. The next game that we got here was Iowa State versus BYU. And I only caught the first half of this live, but I was really into it. It was late. I think this game started at 9:30 or 10:30 on Saturday. It was one of the last games of the night, especially the ones that mattered more in the terms of the tournament teams. But the first half, this was a ton of fun to watch. I'd seen Dibanza play a few times, AJ Dibanza, but I hadn't seen him play like this before. In the first half, I thought he was a 6'9" Anthony Edwards. I said that to somebody else. Turns out Draymond Green actually said that about a month ago on a podcast or on ESPN or something. So I kind of felt dumb for taking what Draymond said. I didn't know that before. But I was really excited watching him. I mean, cannot believe he plays like six. I can't believe he plays the way he does, and he's 6'9". He's so fast. He's shifty. He's got a really nice dribble package. He can turn around really quickly. He's a 3-level scorer. He gets a ton of free throws and usually hits them at a pretty good clip. He's legit. I mean, there's very little. I know he makes mistakes sometimes and he can be turnover prone, but I think some of that is overblown when looking at college prospects, the NBA world. So I like him a lot. I get it now. AJ Davansa is really good, and this BYU team would be so much better if they had Richie Saunders still in there, who'd been there for a couple of years. But I think he tore his ACL, so he's out for the year. He'll go pro, maybe second round pick. I know you like Iowa State a decent bit. What was your reaction to this game?
Yeah, I mean AJ DeBance is he's just really good. There's no other way to put it. You know, I watched a little bit of that game, and BYU just killed him inside. It was like 40 to 22 points in the paint, which a decent amount of that came from AJ, either him scoring or, him dishing to the big or whatnot. And honestly, Iowa State kind of underwhelmed me this game. I always thought of them as being, a three type of team. And watching the few games that I have of them, they would knock down tons of threes and that sort of thing. But they struggle to shoot the ball. Their main shooter, Milan, I'm not gonna pronounce his last name because I'll butcher it, but he struggled to shoot the ball. Joshua Jefferson, I think is his name. He had a real big game. He almost had a triple double. Ultimately it comes down to Richie Saunders being out for BYU and how well BYU, goes forward. I mean, there's going to be a time where a team just puts full lockdown on AJ DeBanza and just takes him fully out of the game and makes somebody like Robert Wright or their other wing, beat him, which I'm not sure if they're capable. Like if you run like a box and one and just put somebody on AJ DeBanza, I don't think that BYU is that strong, especially without Richie Saunders to be able to beat you.
That's fair. I'm not sure you can get a box and one go. It would be like a weird kind of form of a box and one because Dabanza plays inside a lot to be trying to do, like it would just get really clogged in there having your box and then Dabanza trying to drive in. I do think you have the right mindset where it's like put somebody locked down in Dabanza and just block the inside, get the paint clogged up, and then force them to shoot threes because they have been a 3-point shooting team for a while. But without Richie, they've started going on inside. I think you said what, like they had 18 more points in the paint the other day, and Iowa State's a pretty big team too. So if you just kind of you have a big roster, you kind of take that aspect out of their offensive game, it's gonna be tough. And I think again, I keep saying this, but I think it's gonna cost them come March. I just don't know that they have the offense to compete with some of the best teams in the tournament. I mean, I like BYU decent bit, but I also want to shout out Kata too. I liked him a lot last year. He's such a low usage big, but he's a lot of fun to watch defensively. I can't believe he's 6'8". I just found that out today. I thought he was like at least 6'10", 6'11". He plays much bigger than he is. So I like BYU, but I think again, I think they have issues. Honestly, I can't trust them past the Sweet 16. It's going around somebody so young. I think that may be a problem come March Madness. I just said I like this guy a lot, but he still is very inexperienced. He's pretty young. They have their issues. And as for Iowa State's, you mentioned Joshua Jefferson. I hadn't seen a ton of him until the other day. He is an interesting guy because he wasn't shooting, but he still, like you said, finished with, I think it was 8 rebounds and 7 assists. He had a really good game besides not being able to hit shots. So I think he will be an impact NBA player next year. I think he's supposed to be a mid to late first round pick, if I had to guess, but obviously that could change before the draft. And I've had this concern for Iowa State. I think I told you maybe a week or so ago. I was worried about Iowa State's shooting. They were a good 3-point shooting team statistically, and you said before you'd known them as a 3-point shooting team. I don't know that they had the roster for it. I mean, I just think that they're shooting better than they will be. Like on average, I think they've been doing kind of playing above their weight in threes, and I would say that that's not going to stay, and it's going to cost them in March Madness as well. Granted, I think it's going to be closer to the Elite Eight or Final Four matchup before that happens. But if they miss a ton of threes, they may get blown out early. Not blown out early, but they may lose early and get upset. You know.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think BYU is probably going to be like they're probably going to get knocked out pretty early depending on their draw and how things go, but this team can't afford any more injuries, especially if one of like Robert Wright or even if Debanza goes down, they won't do good at all, but if one of their role players gets hurt, I think it might even be a round of 32 because they don't have much depth coming off the bench, which is sort of a big factor for BYU. And then Iowa State, they're kind of like you said, they're an interesting team. They kind of have a bunch of players that can usually shoot the ball, but then on any given night, if they're not hitting, then they're not going to win. I really like that Taman Lipsey kid. He's
Yeah,
really
he is
good.
he is better than I thought he was going to be going into that game.
Yeah, he can really pass the ball, and he's good finisher and that sort of thing. So I really like Iowa State. I don't know. I'm still up in the air about where I feel they'll get knocked out. I don't know. I'm leaning towards like Sweet 16 ish. But it depends on their draw, and also I probably got to watch a little bit more about them and just see bench production, that sort of thing. But they're definitely an interesting team.
Definitely. The last game we're going to talk about today is the Cincinnati Kansas upsets. I did not see this one coming. Kansas doesn't lose much at home as far as I'm concerned. I think they have one of the best home records under Bill Self of frankly any coach in my lifetime. So I was really not was I not expecting this game to end up in favoring Cincinnati. They kind of blew them out at the end of that game. I mean, it was probably a 1 or 2 score game, about 5 or 10 minutes left, and then they just took him down. I think this was a classic case of Kansas looking forward to the Houston game, and it's called a look-ahead game, right? You're not worried about the team that's playing today because you're so worried about the team you're playing in 2 or 3 days because they're a much better team. You get caught looking ahead, caught lacking, and that's exactly what happened in the Cincinnati game. So, what was your thoughts to this game? Did you catch much of it, and how do you feel about Cincinnati?
Yeah, I caught a tiny bit of the beginning of it, but I was thinking the same thing as you. I was like, "There's no way that Kansas loses to Cincinnati, especially at home." But I was proven wrong, and I had always been. I don't know a ton about Cincinnati, but I had always been pretty high on Baba Miller. I believe he was at Florida State. Uh, 2 years ago, and I think he was always pretty good for them. And he one time, I'm pretty sure he killed State. And then I don't know much about that Theom kid, but he played really well. He had like 27, 29, something like that. He's I think like 6'11", got really wide wingspan, and he can play ball. You know, Kansas shooting 22% is just not going to win them many games, especially since a lot of their, other than, Badunga's points in the paint, they shoot the ball at a high clips. But yeah, I was really taken away by them winning at Kansas. I'm pretty sure I was watching one of the other games that was happening, and then you texted me and you were like, Cincinnati just beat Kansas or whatever, and I was really shocked at that.
Yeah, this was actually a pretty good mix of Kansas like shooting themselves in the foot and Cincinnati also taking care of business. I can't blame either team. I think Melvin Council Jr., as much as I like that guy because he killed State and he's done really good in a few games, he basically shot them out of this one. He was like 3 for 14 from the field, something like that. He was one of those guys that was also shooting a lot, like you're talking about. It just wasn't really hitting the shots today. Badunga is so good. I've been saying that for a while. Badunga is a really good center. I think he should for sure be a first round center. I can't believe that there's a world where he goes early second in some mock drafts or just, in the draft as a whole. I don't see that. I like him a lot. He's really solid. He does a lot of what I want a center, especially in college, to do. I mean, he's looks like a man amongst boys with the even with the lower usage that he has in college. Cincinnati's profile is a really good team. I didn't realize how good Cincinnati was. They're bad against good teams, which obviously is a problem that they're 2-9 in quad one games, looking at the stats right here. But they're one of the best defensive teams in the nation, and they're above average at nearly everything. They're a pretty good rebounding team. They're a pretty good turnover team. They're pretty good at shooting threes or taking a lot of threes. They play good defense, both from twos and threes. Like they don't foul a ton. They just have a lot of stuff going for them as far as one of these kind of middle of the pack teams goes. And if they're not careful, they are going to make a tournament and maybe either win as the 11 seed, like in the play-in game, for the NCAA tournament, or if they get something like a 10, they might take care of a 7 seed and people be a little bit surprised about it. So I like this Bearcat team a decent bit. They've had some good wins recently. This is far and away their best win. So I'm happy for them. I want to talk about Kansas as well because I actually really like this Kansas team a decent bits. For some reason there's something that kind of scares me off of them, but I don't know what it is 100%. But I think they have a lot of what I'm looking for, a team to make a deep run. Like I think Kansas should make the Final Four. If I had to predict the Final Four teams today, depending on certain matchups, how that would go and when making this hypothetical bracket, I would probably have them in the Elite Eight or Final Four. I like this Kansas team a decent bit. Bill Self is also, like I said before, one of the best coaches in my lifetime. So they do a lot of stuff right. They profile pretty well as well. I believe in this Kansas team. We'll get to it, in the next episode, but they took care of Houston pretty well. I think it was yesterday. So I'm excited to see this team in the tournament. I think they can go pretty far. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the opposite to you. Kansas kind of scares me a little bit. Just with everything surrounding Darren Peterson and all that, you don't know if he's going to play in the second half or how many minutes or you know anything like that. But if they can figure Darren Peterson out and if he can, give him consistent minutes on any given night, they definitely have a chance. Whenever they came to Raleigh and beat up on State, Melvin Council, he had one of the best games of his career, and he's definitely built on that, and he's playing a lot better this year than he has in years past. So they're definitely a fun team. If they can figure out Darren Peterson, they'll definitely make the Elite Eight. But depending on who they play and that sort of thing, they might be able to make the Final Four.
I got you. I think the reason that I'm like I understand all of Derek Peterson concerns. He's been a little bit flaky as far as playing games. That's an understatement. There's been a lot of speculation on what's going on with him as a player. His love for the game, and some of that might be over exaggerated, but the facts are the facts. He's missed a lot of games, so there are question marks around there. And I think what I like though is I like this team around Peterson. Like obviously he takes a lot of shots and he averages a lot of points, so they're going to need him to play in pretty much every game March Madness, right? That's a foregone conclusion. But I like Badunga a lot. Bryson Tiller is really underrated. This guy doesn't get enough attention as a 6'11 freshman. I don't know if he's going to go to the NBA. I assume he probably isn't, but I think he's a really interesting prospect, and I just think he's good. I think people need to talk about him more. I think he's going to be really good in college in a year or two, and probably the NBA following that. Melvin Council Jr. is again also fantastic. He shot really poorly this game, but he's a really good guy. We saw him in person. He was amazing at NC State. One of the better college basketball games I've seen, like basketball, players play in person that I've seen this year. So I like their starting five a decent bit. I think that's what it is, but obviously I do have questions around Derek Peterson like the rest of the world does. I think that makes sense to be worried about.
Yeah, and one last point, I think that Kansas should utilize Badunga more. I mean, I feel like he's kind of underused, and for him being that good, I feel like they could almost get a spark from someone like him going down into tournament or whatever that might look like. So I just feel like they should use their pieces more. I feel like they're rightfully so. They're trying to play through Peterson, but you know, I feel like his status is kind of up in the air and no one really knows what to expect from him. So maybe, he'll give you 20 points a game if he's playing his full minutes. So maybe, play through somebody like Badunga would be the spark for them. So
Taylor. I mean, I think it's just like Bidunga is shooting 65% this year in the field, which is actually lower. He shot 70% as a freshman. He's obviously got a lot more playing time. He's getting 30 minutes a night now, but yeah, he's been very efficient. He went 8 for 10 in this game we're talking about in the loss by 15 to Cincinnati. And again, I like Bryson Tiller a lot too. I think he needs to get more touches. He went 2 for 3 on this game. I understand he's going to have lower usage when you have people like Peterson and Council taking a lot of shots at the guards positions, the wings. But again, I think you're right about that. I hadn't really thought about it, but that's gonna cost them if they play too much into Divanza and Council Jr. like they did in this game, and neither of them really have efficient nights. They're not play through their bigs is gonna cost them a game offensively.
yeah, and as a state fan, I kind of have to bring this up, but I'm surprised at how little Paul Mabia is playing, or however you pronounce his name. He originally committed to state, and I thought he was going to be like our next big, like the next Badunga. And I'm surprised, like he's getting like 2 minutes a game doing nothing. So I'm honestly surprised that. I mean, I guess that's what he gets for going to Kansas instead of state.
Yeah, he might have redshirted actually because of how little playing time he has. I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't shock me.
Really? That's definitely a possibility, but I know that he played like 2 minutes against us or something crazy, and he's played like 2 minutes in a bunch of different games. I don't know why, but um, that's definitely a possibility though.
Well, that's all I have for today's episode. So we'll get back to you guys pretty soon with more college basketball based on this weekend and some of the early week games too. There's been a lot of good ones. Our NC Wolfpack play against the Cavaliers. I'm really excited to see that. It may not go perfectly, but we'll talk about that a little more coming soon. Thanks, you guys. Please like and subscribe on the video, and we'll see you soon.